Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar this afternoon. We will just do the customary wait a couple of more minutes for any latecomers, and then we'll get started. Okay, we will get started now. Thank you for joining again. To anybody who's joined in the last couple of minutes. Today's webinar will be a presentation about WhereScape, what we do, how we do it, and how we may be able to help you be ready for AI. The format will be that we'll run through a presentation, and then at the end there will be some time for Q&A. So my name is Paul Watson-Gover, as it says on this slide. Looking at the list of people here, I know that some of you already know me, but for those of you that don't, I have been in this industry for well over 20 years now. For many of those years, I've actually been using WhereScape software, originally as a customer, then as a consultant, and through various roles to where I am now as a senior solutions architect for WhereScape. WhereScape's a global company with customers all over the world. It's been running since the year 2000. So, lots and lots of history and experience with our software out there. We're an end-to-end solution that we provide via two tools, WhereScape 3D and WhereScape Red. So we take you right through from initial conception and design through to actual build and orchestration of your data warehouse. And what we're aiming to do is bring as much automation as is practical to that whole process in terms of that might be model generation using 3D, that can be code generation via Red, right through to documentation, and as I've already mentioned, orchestration of the whole solution. Okay, 3D is a design tool. If you looked at it and used it, you would see some similarities with modeling tools. I hesitate to call it a modeling tool. It doesn't have the depth of functionality of some modeling tools like Irwin. The idea behind it, and 3D in fact stands for data-driven design, with the idea being that you're building a data warehouse, therefore you need to know what the data looks like. So why not start with connecting to data, discovering it, maybe doing a bit of high-level profiling so you can get an understanding of your data sources before you start to design or model anything that you wish to build. What this allows you to do is to keep one eye on the source data that you're looking to model whilst you build out your design. Therefore, you don't end up with this problem that you used to have many years ago now, probably back when I first started, where a modeler would go away with some requirements into a dark room. They would emerge with a model that then you couldn't fit the data into because it didn't exist. So the idea behind 3D was to kind of take that away. It subsequently evolved into something else when we started getting involved in the likes of with data vault projects. We realized that we could take that metadata that we were using, apply some rules to it, and actually have it generate models from other types of models as well, generate that metadata, which is then generally kicked over the fence to WhereScape Red to actually be built on the target platform, which leads us nicely into the next slide. So once you have done all of that, 3D also does a lot more than that. It's a very high level overview of 3D. Doesn't really do it justice. But once you're finished there, you can then actually think about building your objects in your database of choice. Obviously, the title for this presentation is about building in the cloud. So maybe that's Snowflake, it's Databricks, it could be Microsoft Azure, even Redshift, Google BigQuery, and others. We support both cloud databases and on-prem databases. The idea being behind Red being, well, let's do as much of the work as possible, as is practical, with the software so that you don't have to sit there typing it out by hand. That's what Red does on the database level. It also has an orchestration tool built in, but this is optional. You can, of course, use a third-party orchestration tool. Okay, that's a quick overview of the company and our products. Let's look at the challenges. Now, this slide obviously is titled Today's Challenges, but if you've been around long enough, which I have, you'll also know these are yesterday's challenges as well, and likely tomorrow's challenges. They haven't really changed. These are just a few of the challenges that are faced by data teams today. They've been around for a long time. They've certainly been around for the entire 20 plus years that I've been in the industry. The underlying technologies have changed quite a bit, particularly with the advent of cloud databases and now AI coming along to disrupt things further. But these challenges faced by the people tasked with building these solutions are still relatively the same. And now, of course, as I mentioned, AI, we've now got people figuring out, how can I use it? I need to use it. People saying that, obviously, even though they don't know that they do need to use it, but they want to use it. And they're wondering how can they make their data products fit for AI, as well as facing all of these other historical problems in building their warehouse. Why WhereScape? Well, obviously, as I said in an earlier slide, we've been around a long time. We've been doing this a long time. We know what we're doing. These are maybe some of the reasons why you might. This agility and speed that's suggested by the statements on this slide does enable the teams to be more productive, operate with less risk, and operate in more complex environments, with the automation doing most of the work for them. What this allows then is the business to remain happy about the progress and what's happening, what's being delivered, and increases the trust in those that are delivering it. Now, some of these may seem a bit far-fetched. If you look at things like improve developer productivity by 800%. I'm not sure who came up with that measurement. but they're not actually that far-fetched, having done this for a long time. When you're using an automation tool to generate the majority of the code for you, it allows your developers to focus on the code that really matters, such as the business rules. If you apply the 80-20 rule and assume that 80% of the value that you would derive from a data warehouse comes from only 20% of the code, then even a simple 150 to 200 line procedure or script only contains 30 to 40 lines of code that are really value add. In fact, the reality is it's probably less than that, less lines of code. So why not have something else generate all the rest of the code, which includes all of the headers and the footers and the error handling and any other auditing that you wish to be done repeatedly over and over again, the same code. Have a piece of software do that for you. Now, this is a bit of a simplification to make the point, but it is accurate. And it really can obviously increase your productivity, your team's productivity, and help the team to deliver more is the idea, not to have less people. Another benefit of having a tool do this for you, or do the majority of it for you, is that the code is generated in a consistent way across the team or teams. If you add then to that the flexibility of template-driven code generation, which is what our products allow, you can ensure that the code is generated in a way or within a framework that suits your organization. Doesn't rely on developers having to remember development standards or constantly refer to them, because they are baked into the software, into the templates, and into the way that the tool is configured. It also makes onboarding new people a lot quicker and easier as well, because they don't have to go and ingest those development standards. It's already there for them. They just need to quickly learn how to use the tools. Coming back to the 800% increase in developer productivity, as I said, I'm not sure who calculated that, but it's not actually as unrealistic as it may seem at face value. The productivity increase is not just about the number of lines of code that you can write, or that a developer can write, or the number of tables that they can create. They're also, as they're doing that within our software, generating a ton of really useful metadata, which we'll come back to later on. Not only that, but they're also documenting everything they're building at the same time as they're building it. It's not a separate process. It's part of the same process. The benefit of that is that all developers and, in fact, business users have instant access to a fully documented data warehouse, and they have access as soon as that's created. Okay, admittedly, you have to generate the documentation by pressing a button, but essentially it's there instantly. You don't have to wait for a documentation product to ensure that you have adequate documentation. So an overview of what you do. Again, those of you that have been around a while or seen presentations from us will have seen this slide before, but it's always worth reiterating that this is where we operate, is within and between the red boxes on this diagram. We are interested in bringing automation as much as practical to between landing your data onto your warehouse and providing access layers at the far end. We're not providing reporting tools. Over on the far right, there's plenty of those on the market. The whole thing is underpinned by metadata, allowing you to generate documentation. And I've already mentioned that we have the orchestration part. We support a wide range of data warehouse methodologies. And as I've already touched on, as you build, everything is documented. Now, there's been some confusion around this diagram in recent demos. People seem to think that what this means is you have to build all of these things, or that this is all we do, and that's not the case. It's your choice what you build. Maybe you just want a data store or data lake with some kind of star schema on top of it to provide your access layer. Or maybe you're building a data vault and you wish to have your data vault and business vault, again, maybe with some kind of star schema structures on top for accessing the data. Maybe you want to go back to the old 3NF data warehouse. We support that as well. Or maybe you want to do where I started out, and that's just building a good old dimensional warehouse where everything just goes straight into a whole load of star schemas and then out to your reporting layer. It's up to you. It's your warehouse. Maybe you want to invent your own data warehouse methodology. We could actually support that as well. You're not limited to what you can do with our software, other really than by your imagination. Okay, we'll walk through a few quick case studies just to show and to prove that the challenges that face organizations of all sizes are more or less the same, and that we can help resolve all of them across industries. It doesn't really matter. Data's data. This particular customer, they had two data warehouses in two locations. They want to consolidate to one to allow for global reporting with very limited resources. So simplification of the whole development and management process in the warehouse was essential to them. In the end, they were able to use our tools to manage the end-to-end process, utilizing existing skills of their limited resources, and that's key as well. Everything we do is native to that target platform, whatever it is. So there's no new coding to learn. It's just SQL, but it's the SQL that you're used to. And now they're able to respond to business requirements in a much more timely manner. And they've gone on to enhance their process and use other features that are available from our software in order to deliver more frequently to the business and work more closely with the business in defining their requirements, understanding them, and delivering what they need. As we go up a step, this customer is a slightly bigger organization with more locations, more different data, and as is typical in this kind of environment, that just leads to more data silos. Being a slightly bigger company as well, what they were facing was some staff turnover, and that can lead to inconsistent and disjointed development and documentation practices across the warehouse implementation. So then in implementing WhereScape, they've moved from disparate, disconnected data management to a fully integrated system. And they estimate that the BI team is 75% more productive. Now, because this data and documentation is maintained in one place from all business areas, the business and development teams have a far better understanding of what they have in the data warehouse. Also, as I've mentioned earlier, the fact that you're doing this now in a consistent way with your standards baked in, if you do have that high staff turnover, it's less of an issue. It's never not going to be an issue, but you can mitigate it somewhat by following these practices. And they're now able to craft well-designed solutions that follow best practices and meet their organization's standards. And they do this quickly and easily. Now we move on to a large enterprise. Now they have not so limited resources. I actually worked with them on this project, and their team was pretty stable. They had some guys that had been there for a long time doing this work. However, they still had quite a few data silos. They were a Teradata customer at the time, and it's not untypical to have lots of sandboxes when you're on Teradata, and those sandboxes end up being the actual production warehouses. Not only that, they obviously, being a larger organization, had multiple database technologies. So you had some things running on Teradata, some things running on another on another database. So they also have that need to consolidate and simplify. It's the same as the mid-sized organization. And the way they did that again is by implementing WhereScape as their single tool set. They were also using very expensive ETL software, which they were able to decommission. And then through learning how to build these things using WhereScape, they were able to deliver their data warehouse initiatives in days rather than months as they were doing previously. And they also, as a byproduct, were able to significantly reduce their load times by moving to ELT versus ETL. As a result of this, they were able to use the warehouse to identify and improve operations, resulting to some positive movement on the bottom line of the business. Another thing that came out of this, due to the way that the software works and its metadata-driven approach, they came up with a hybrid development process. And this has since been adopted by other organizations. So if you did look at this case study, you would see a version of this diagram on there to explain what their hybrid development process is. This doesn't quite represent it, but it's close. What they've got here is another kind of arrow that sits halfway down this one. And essentially what they did was went more or less direct from source to some kind of information mart design. So working and iterating with the business to come up with the information mart, data mart that they wanted to, or they needed in order to provide their reports. And so they would build that, and that would then become the requirements essentially for their EDW, because it would tell them what sources they need, which data items they needed, to go ahead and then build a foundation layer underneath. That happened to be a data vault in this instance. And then they were able to use 3D and Red to create that EDW layer and deploy it to the target database. And then simply replumb the data. So where it was coming from a source table, they were then able to redirect the sourcing to the underlying data vault instead, with no impact to the end user. And this is a very sensible approach, in my opinion. It's certainly one that I've talked about many times over the years. One of the benefits of this approach is that you don't have to try and do too much in any given iteration or sprint, or whatever your approach is that you're following, your development approach. You can just focus on the most important requirements at that time, build out one data mart, one information mart, whatever it is, and then just build the underlying EDW for that requirement, not trying to do the whole thing in one go. Which, of course, if you're using a data vault, is one of the key principles of data vault. So that certainly should be a very good fit. Okay, the lessons learned across these and many other projects over the years are that organizations, regardless of size, complexity, regardless of data, they face fairly common challenges. They may be slightly different, but there's a lot of commonality across all of them. You need those effective strategies for risk management. One such strategy is to implement some software, ideally WhereScape's automation software, that allows you to mitigate a lot of the risk by doing things in that consistent manner across your whole organization. The phased approach, that just makes sense. Don't try and do the whole thing at once. You need a tool that allows you to iterate rapidly and deliver small chunks as you go along, rather than trying to do the whole thing at once. And leveraging cloud infrastructure for AI success. Many of these organizations started on-prem and have subsequently migrated to the cloud. using our software to help them generate those structures and the code that populates them. And if you really do want to use AI, whilst it's not absolutely necessary to have the data in the cloud, you probably are going to get a better result with your data in the cloud than on-prem, unless you're building your own AI, obviously on-prem, in which case this could still apply. Okay, so what makes the data warehouse built with our software AI ready? Well, the answer to that is context. So I've sat through quite a few presentations, particularly a fun one by Francesco Papini about chatting with your data. I've also been using a little bit of AI recently. I've resisted until very recently. I just wasn't interested in the hype, but I've actually started to play around a bit. And what's clear is you need to provide clear, concise context to the AI in order to help it deliver the results that you want. And that's where having a metadata-driven tool can really help, because you can provide that context. You can provide lots and lots of context, and some of that is automatically generated, and some of that is just part of the build process, and some of that context can be added by you by way of additional documentation as you go through the build. So a couple of examples here. This is not an exhaustive list, but this is just some examples. When it comes to 3D, the design tool, you have the ability to output full documentation on models in the form of a Word document or a web page. Obviously, there's a lot of information contained in there. This one here I've generated came from a source system, a source database. So there's a lot of information in there about the tables, the columns, the data types, the relationships. Everything's in there. So that could be generated and passed into an AI engine as context. Likewise, the model metadata itself can be exported into various formats. Here I'm showing it exported as XML, which is the default for WhereScape 3D to be ingested by other 3D users or WhereScape Red. Again, all of that information is contained in there, plus additional information that could really help give context to your AI efforts. And even the diagrams, some of the more up-to-date LLMs and AI tools are able to actually parse diagrams and pictures and understand them and use those to provide context. There are many, many other things. If you I mentioned data profiling, something you can do in 3D. Now it's fairly basic. We're not trying to be a data profiling tool, but it's there. You can capture that profiling information and you can include that in your documentation. And there may be some interesting metadata in there that would help with your AI efforts. But the point is that there are many, many ways to add that additional contextual information in 3D into your models. You can also enter any standard documentation fields that come out of the box. But one of the things with it is you can also configure your own. So if there is additional metadata that you want to capture in a new field, you can also provide that, and that could be useful for adding further context for the AI. Okay, and then in WhereScape Red, you've got similar options. Now in Red, obviously, one of the things you do is you generate the code. So you could export the code as files that could be used to give context. It could be the DDL. You've got the generated documentation, including a business glossary. That could obviously be passed in as well as additional information. The glossary, you can also extend it with your own additional useful fields likewise, in the documentation of the objects themselves, you're able to enhance that further with many additional documentation fields that could provide additional context. As well, you've got things like lineage and the impact analysis available at both column and table level. That could be a useful feed into the AI engine for whatever it is that you're trying to do with it. Essentially, what you're trying to do, or what I'm trying to say here, is that we don't see AI necessarily bringing a huge amount to the process of building the data warehouse, but where we do see it being useful is then analyzing the data underneath. And so by being able to access the red and 3D metadata, you can then use that to provide context to help the AI if that's helping a business analyst to do some analysis of the data, because you can provide extra information that they can use to then get the most out of the data that's been processed. One final point on that, on the metadata, is it's also fully open and queryable on both tools. So what that means, actually, if you wanted to write some kind of bespoke export of the metadata in order to give that context in a very specific way to answer particular questions, and because you know that's the right way to do it, you can also do that as well. And you can do that with scripts that you can run from within the tool as well. You don't have to go outside of the tools even to make that work. And that is the end of the presentation. So if you're not familiar with WhereScape and you'd like to know more, you can scan this QR code. At least I hope you can. I haven't tried it myself, but I assume it works. So at that point, I will draw it to a close and open it up to any questions. Okay. No questions from anyone? Oh, does 3D have data lineage? Yes, 3D has, well, yes, 3D has lineage built into it, again, at both table and column level. You do it in the same way that you do in red, in that it's via a right-click context menu. You right-click on an object, and then it will provide you with the lineage of that object. You can even do that at a model level as well. So in 3D, you have that additional option to show model lineage, as well as data at the table and column level. It looks like you're suggesting feeding 3D and red documentation into an AI and look for improvements. Okay, that's not what I'm suggesting, but actually, maybe you could do that as well. What I'm suggesting is that you can feed the metadata in to an AI and to help it generate analysis of the data at the analysis end. But actually, what you've said there, that could be a possibility as well. You could feed the documentation in and have it suggest improvements in terms of the way that you're processing the data, the code that you're generating to process the data. So I guess there would be options for that. Yeah, I think you're probably right, but I hadn't thought of that.
Like we have someone that raised their hands, Antonio. I'm gonna
Oh, okay.
you can ask the question, Antonio.
Okay.
Ask the question. Or if you'd like to type it, that's fine too, unless it was a mistake.
Tony, I've given you permission to talk, I think.
Yeah. Apologies, it was an error from my side. I copied
That's okay.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. There's another question in the chat. Does 3D support governance tags or any means of data defining? Yes, it does. So it has its own inbuilt tagging mechanism, for want of a better term, where you can apply types to your attributes and your tables. But also what we've recently released is some Purview integration, where you're able to connect to Purview, pull in that governance data from Purview, and then use that to augment your designs and your generation as you go further downstream. There are plans to enable other governance tool integration. Please don't ask me which ones, because I don't actually know, but I know that we're looking to open that functionality up to other tools to enable you to categorize and your data based on those data governance tools. Oh, I have another one. I have created a ChatGPT project that is highly focused on red and 3D questions. It has proven very helpful. It searches the internet and local proprietary document stores and coming up with answers. Oh, okay. That sounds very interesting, Jeff. I'd be curious to see a demo of that myself. So not so much a question as a statement there. Any other questions?
Doesn't look like it, but we will be sending this recording out to you all, and it'll be available on our website as well if you ever want to revisit it. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Paul.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Have a great. Oh, you got one question, or
No.
for Jeff. Sorry. All right. Thanks,
All right.
everyone.
Thanks, guys. Goodbye.
Bye.